Good to meet you.
How you doing?
And your work. Can you explain a little bit about what it is that you're doing and where we are today?
Okay, well at the moment you're in my family's factory. We've had this since about 1910 and it goes back a long way in heavy engineering. We're in the heart of the Black Country and it's really easy to make big heavy metal stuff here because it's all set up for that. And my job is a public monument sculptor, so I go into a community, kind of find out what they identify with, and I distill that into a concept, and then hopefully everybody likes that concept, and then it gets turned into a sculpture. In this case, for Tamworth, what Tamworth sort of really identified with more than anything else, more than Robert Peel and more than sort of the industrial heritage, was the Anglo-Saxon heritage. And probably, I think, the most iconic figure in that heritage itself is Queen Aethelflaed, because there's Offa, of course, but Offa was much more of a general to Mercia. Aethelflaed seemed to concentrate her powers in Tamworth, and also was arguably the first female ruler in England. So she's an incredible character that's hardly ever really been celebrated, and the fact that Tamworth can kind of claim her for their identity is something that they should and have thankfully jumped on,
and I think rightly very proud of as well.
Yeah, definitely, because it sort of represents that there's never been a point in history when women haven't been in a position of power, and so this isn't something new that we're talking about in the press. This has been around forever, so it shouldn't surprise anybody. And so what we've done is created this concept of Aethelflaed as a sort of warrior queen, which she made a lot of alliances, but she also fought for her people. She did a lot of building, so she was more of a diplomatic tactician than a sort of thuggish overlord, as would have been quite common then. So to depict her well, we've got her kind of essentially quite an unpassive pose that is making sure that she's got a lot of energy and dynamism, and that she looks like a really powerful female character.
Showing her strength.
Yeah, that's it, incredibly so. And even though her actual garb would probably be a much more sedate, sort of lots of cloth style look, she was often depicted at that time and past that time as a bit more armoured, to be honest, to give her sort of the symbolism of the warrior. And the Anglo-Saxons used to be really fond of the Romans. They had a great identity with the Romans, and when they wanted to depict things like sort of virtue or grace, it would be in a Roman garb. So we've taken those influences and really kind of drawn it down so that there's this sort of Roman cuirass and the epaulets as well, and the sort of skirt and the chain mails, and all of that packs together so that we've got a good sort of balance between the way that Anglo-Saxons depicted her, the way that she might have been, and the way that the 21st century will kind of remember her, I suppose.
Looking at the work close at hand, it's very detailed.
Yeah, there's a kind of huge amount of detail in there, which is something which I couldn't help really. You get really buried in a project and you can't help but just throw a load of work into it. It's such a rich commission to be able to work on. There's so much that if you get it wrong, it's wrong for posterity, so I wanted to be able to make it a really high quality piece with loads of detail. The features I've tried to make as realistic as possible, and at the same time the Gibbs and Canning were mentioned quite a lot within Tamworth, and there's an aesthetic to the way that they depict people, very neoclassical, like the Statue of Liberty, with sort of firm straight jaws, quite angular, and so it was very much in the mix to try and use the Gibbs and Canning aesthetic when making a piece of sculpture, which is what we've done here.
What input were you given from the sources? I believe there were meetings and different ideas put forward.
Well, at the initial stages, I worked with just literally going into the market halls, talking to people in pubs, everywhere, all over Tamworth, talking to people just to see how they identified with different things about Tamworth, what was they associations, for example. But then as soon as I started to find out less broad representation, so it was things like Robert Peel, or for example the Robin Reliant Factory, or the Anglo-Saxons, then I started doing more acute research with the local history societies, historians, archivists, people that work in the castle, whose professional job it is to relay this information to kids. And yeah, that was really important, so I got a good mix. And then when we found out it was definitely going to be Aethelflaed, there was quite a lot of research into who she was, what she was like, and how to depict her particularly. So the entire sculpture is actually mounted off the sword, and the reason for that is that on a traffic island you need a lot of visibility at a low level, but as well as that, it's kind of, you want something to be a 21st century piece, and that's a good way of making it more modern looking. So she's mounted off the sword, which in itself gives it a kind of like grounding, it makes it really quite different, I think, and almost.
It also looks like the power as well.
Yeah.
With the sword.
Yeah, hopefully there'll be quite a powerful piece.
She's holding it, isn't she?
Yeah, that's right. So she's holding it, and it makes her look stronger because of the amount of weight that's above it. And so the sword itself and the shield are the two things that are inherently very, very Anglo-Saxon. So the pommel at the top of the sword has got a very, it's got like a triple shell look to it, which is, endemic to the Anglo-Saxon sort of sword, hilts and pommels. And the shield itself as well has got the kind of spiral design on with a large, they call it like a nipple boss in the middle, that is really to the period, so that anchors that to the right sort of place and time.
Looking at it, as I've said, the detail, just looking at how the buckle as the armour is held on, it's a shame that when it's so high up, people are not actually going to be able to see the detail that's there.
Yeah, I think regarding the detail, it might seem a little bit like an excessive time being put into it, but if you don't, you can tell the difference. Even the things that you don't think you'll be able to see, you might gain a glimpse of them, and that's the difference between something that's had a lot of effort put into it and something that's kind of almost like a clip art bit of sculpture, really. So I've tried to make sure that there's something from all angles, because a sculpture is a three-dimensional object. You need to, especially on a traffic island where you're going to be driving around it, you need to make sure there's something to look at from everywhere.
And people are actually going to see it as they arrive from the station and make their way into Tamworth.
Yeah, I think
that's the island, isn't it?
Yeah, the idea for one of the sort of, I suppose, specifications for the monument was that it had to give an idea of circulation, it had to give some direction to it. So which is why she's actually pointing directly into Tamworth. That's where the energy's going, that will point you, that'll give you a kind of good indication of where you are as well. So in that regard, hopefully it'll aid a little bit of sort of civil engineering too.
And I believe she's been decapitated.
She has. I was getting really frustrated at dropping all the little bits while I was trying to weld her face together. So I cut her head off and put it on a bench. And that's why I sort of do all the grinding and welding. And, would you like a go at some grinding while we're here?
That would be wonderful.
Okay.
As long as I'm not going to be the one person that destroys.
Oh no, I think, if you can see how you make it, which is by hitting it exceptionally hard, there's no way of breaking it really.
I suppose some days it's a little bit of stress release maybe?
Yeah, it's quite a cathartic thing, but between the physiotherapist and A&E, I'm getting my value out of the National Health Service.
Well, how much of you is actually going to be long to Tamworth when you finish?
I'd say at least a pint.
Is that of blood or sweat and tears?
Oh, just blood. I sweat and tears quite a bit more of that, I'd have thought.
Well, thank you very much for your time.